Applause roared through the atrium as the CEO raised his glass. To Jacob Flynn, Trevor Bain announced, for stepping up and saving the Novanta project when it mattered most. People turned to Jacob, who stood there smiling, sheepish and smug at the same time. He hadn't touched a line of code. He hadn't pulled a single overnight. But now the team was clapping for him, like he'd held the company on his shoulders. I stood at the edge of the crowd, hands frozen around a paper cup of lukewarm coffee. My eyes locked on the slide projected behind Trevor metrics, milestones, client quotes, all pulled directly from the work I'd delivered over 12 straight weeks of chaos. The room didn't know, but Trevor did. He'd reviewed the dashboards, signed off on my briefings, forwarded the client's praise for Morgan's relentless problem-solving under pressure. And still, here he was, gifting the credit to someone who never even showed up for the emergency calls. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just watched as Jacob nodded in false humility, watched my team cheer for a performance I'd given in silence, watched Trevor lock eyes with me for the briefest second, then look away, like I was just another intern near the snack table. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an oversight. It was deliberate. The worst part wasn't the betrayal. It was the applause, the way the lie echoed louder than the truth ever had. How easy it was for people to forget who had done the work the moment someone else was handed the microphone. I had given everything to this company, 80-hour weeks, holidays spent on Zoom, birthdays postponed. I had built the entire recovery framework that kept Novanta from walking out the door with $8, $3 million of our pipeline in hand. And I'd done it quietly because I believed loyalty would be recognized. But today, I realized something else. Recognition wasn't based on effort. It was based on narrative, and the version of the story they chose to tell, the one with Jacob as the hero, didn't have room for someone like me. So I stood there, face still, hands trembling ever so slightly, and said nothing, not yet, because I knew something they didn't. The logs still existed, the code commits were real, the timelines were intact, and if I ever decided to show the truth, the actual truth, it would speak louder than any standing ovation. I didn't need applause, I needed evidence, and starting that day, I made sure I'd never walk into another meeting without it. 4 years, that's how long I'd been the one behind the curtain, not because I couldn't take the spotlight, but because I'd always believed the work should speak first. When I joined Stratus Edge Software, we were a mid-sized team with a few solid clients and a shaky roadmap. I wasn't brought in with ceremony, no signing bonus, just a quiet request from a friend of a friend. Can you help us stabilize client delivery? I said yes. Back then, I still believed that loyalty mattered more than leverage, so I stayed late, showed up early, built entire project pipelines out of broken process docs and inconsistent client notes. I patched holes others didn't even know existed. I wrote unit tests while the rest of the office slept, and hand-wrote onboarding sheets when HR dropped the ball. No one asked me to, but no one else was doing it. When Novanta Solutions started wavering their $8 a $3 million account, drifting toward non-renewal, no one came to me, but I stepped in anyway. I didn't ask for permission. I just rebuilt the deployment plan, flew to their regional office on my own PTO, and fixed the relationship one conversation at a time. We rescoped the features, restructured delivery milestones, and redefined what partnership meant. I gave everything I had to that project. 80-hour weeks, a pulled-back muscle from sleeping on my office couch, a missed anniversary dinner that, in hindsight, cost me more than I thought it would. But when the email came in from Novanta's VP of Strategy, we're staying. And it's because of Morgan Ellis. I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Relief. Not pride. Not joy. Just a deep, silent exhale. Because I thought that maybe, finally, someone had seen me. The deal locked in. We saved the account. I collapsed that weekend with a bottle of wine and a 2-day sleep coma, thinking the storm had passed. But the Monday after, Jacob Flynn was added to the Novanta channel, shadowing delivery, Trevor said. I didn't question it, just focused on the next sprint. I'd always believed in structure over ego, process over politics, until the credits started to shift, until the deck reviews stopped including my name, until the metrics I built began appearing in presentations without my tags. Still, I held on, because I thought, surely they see it, surely they know. I thought that loyalty, consistency, and results would be recognized in time, but time had passed, and when the celebration came, and the room rose to cheer, they weren't cheering for the one who stayed up through the breakdowns. They were cheering for the one who showed up after it was safe. It started small, just enough to ignore if I wanted to. Jacob being copied on emails that had nothing to do with him, my updates landing in shared folders with his initials tagged next to the versions, the slide decks for Novanta's QBR showing up in my calendar, but now being led by Jacob Flynn. Strategic delivery. At first, I chalked it up to delegation. I told myself I was tired, paranoid, that maybe this was what scaling looked like. Leadership spreading the load, but deep down, I knew better. He wasn't contributing, not in the war rooms, not on the night calls. He hadn't reviewed a single sprint retro, hadn't submitted a single client note worth keeping, yet somehow his name was becoming a fixture where mine had once quietly sat. And Trevor, he stopped asking for my briefs, stopped replying to my check-ins. One afternoon, I overheard 2 product leads talking outside the kitchen. Did you hear? Jacob's being considered for Director of Client Success, Director. Of the client I carried through a storm. I felt the breath catch in my chest, but I didn't say anything. I just stood there with my tea going cold, listening to people rewrite the story in real time. The way you can watch history change, not with lies, but with omission. That week, I noticed my name missing from the delivery health report. My dashboard metrics were intact, but labeled compiled by strategic ops. No attribution, no source trail, just white space where my work used to live. Still, I clung to the idea that someone would fix it, that the system would self-correct. I'd spent 4 years telling myself that good work is always seen eventually, that the right people notice. But maybe that's the lie they sell you to keep you running in place. Then came the last straw. I submitted a raise request, a carefully worded proposal, built on 4 years of metrics, testimonials, retention stats, and revenue impact. I even formatted it cleanly, professionally, not a single emotional plea in sight. 3 days later, I got a reply, 12 words. We are unable to approve compensation changes at this time. Trevor, no context, no meeting, no acknowledgement of anything I'd done, not even a perfunctory thank you. I read the line over and over. Then again, it wasn't rejection that broke me. It was erasure, the kind that seeps in slowly. 100 small cuts that you pretend don't hurt until you finally look down and realize you're bleeding. That night, I sat in the office bathroom, knees pulled in, face buried in my sleeves, shaking not out of rage, but clarity. They weren't just forgetting me. They never intended to see me at all. The office emptied out around 8. Kintispi. I stayed, not because there was anything left to finish. I stayed because I couldn't quite move. My screen was still lit with the 12-word rejection email, glowing like a warning I hadn't seen in time. I had read it so many times it felt carved into my chest. We are unable to approve compensation changes at this time. Trevor, I'd spent hours writing that request, weeks gathering data, building the case, not pleading, just presenting truth, numbers, results, outcomes, the kind of measurable value any executive could quantify, but I wasn't being measured. I was being dismissed. I walked slowly to the restroom, cold fluorescent lights, slightly buzzing. The mirror didn't lie. Pale face, tired eyes, lips pressed too tightly to smile. I stepped into the last stall, locked the door, and sat on the closed lid. The kind of quiet that makes everything louder. The vents hummed, somewhere down the hall. The printer kicked to life and then stopped. I didn't cry, not right away. But when I did, it wasn't a dramatic sob. It was the silent kind, shoulders trembling, face buried in the sleeve of my blazer, not because of the money, not even because of Jacob. It was the realization that I had never actually been seen, not fully, not by the people who decided who got promoted, who got applauded, who got to lead. I had played by the rules, worked twice as hard, stayed twice as late, documented everything, and still, I was written out of the story. They'd made space for someone else, and what stung most, I'd handed them the pen. I walked back to my desk just before 9. 00p. Emmy. The office was empty now. No noise, no distractions. Just me and the hum of machines still running builds I had set up. I looked around the space. Familiar. Too familiar. The whiteboard still had the scoping notes from the Novanta rebuild. The sticky note above my monitor still had my own handwriting. Don't burn out. Deliver differently. Funny. I'd done both. And still, no one clapped. No one even noticed. I opened my laptop, not to finish work, to begin something else. I created a private folder, Archivi GLS 90. Inside it, I began uploading everything code commits, version logs, Slack threads, client testimonials, screenshots of metrics, timelines, meeting transcripts, email praise, anything with a timestamp and a name. I didn't know exactly why. I just knew I needed to start keeping the truth. Because if no one else would record it, I would, not out of revenge, but out of refusal. Refusal to let them erase what I'd built and who I'd been. And once the truth lives somewhere outside of you, you're no longer alone. You're no longer helpless. You're documented. I didn't change anything on the surface. No dramatic exit. No bitter emails. I still showed up early, logged my hours, attended meetings with the same steady tone I'd always used. But behind the scenes, I was building something else. The archive grew quickly. What started as a single folder became a living record, dozens of files carefully labeled, scrubbed for clarity, and cross-referenced by date and project. Everything I'd contributed to Novanta was documented. Proposal drafts, feature scoping notes, late-night bug reports, and every time-stamped commit, tagged with my initials. I didn't embellish. I didn't need to. The facts were enough. Slack threads showed me leading strategy conversations Jacob never joined. Jira tickets carried my comments solving problems before he even knew they existed. Email receipts confirmed praise from Novanta's senior staff, including direct quotes from Lena Rollins. Their VP of strategy, Morgan. Your response time and clarity during this last sprint were instrumental. We would not have moved forward without your leadership. That one I read more than once, because I knew it mattered. They'd tried to make it look like I'd never been essential, so I built proof they couldn't ignore. Then something happened I didn't expect. A calendar invite from Lena Rollins. Subject: Novanta Strategic Debrief. Request: for Morgan Ellis. No CC to Trevor. No Jacob. Just me. The meeting wasn't for another 3 days. But I spent every night until then preparing, not because I was nervous, but because I finally saw the edge of the map. When the call started, Lena greeted me with the kind of professional warmth that masks something sharper underneath. I wanted to connect directly, she said. As we reviewed Stratus Edge's post-project summary, we noticed some inconsistencies. I stayed quiet. She continued, your name isn't listed anywhere in the leadership acknowledgements, but I've personally sat in on your stand-ups. You wrote half the internal docs we use now, and your escalation notes. They saved our rollout. She let the silence hang. Then, Morgan. Where exactly do you sit in the org right now? That question hit like a lightning strike, because she wasn't confused. She was calling the bluff. I didn't rant, didn't accuse. I simply said, that's something I've been wondering myself. She gave a tight smile. Well, she said, we're putting together our proposal for the next phase. I'd like your name at the top of that brief, and I'll be making it clear who we expect to work with. Moving forward, the call ended. I stared at my screen. Then slowly, I smiled. I hadn't made any noise. I hadn't made a scene. But the truth had surfaced anyway. And now, it was speaking for itself. The client debrief was scheduled for 10 a.m. Sharp. Internal invite only. Except this time, Novanta's team requested the agenda. And they requested me by name. Trevor tried to spin it in the prep call. "Let's keep the conversation high level," he said, his voice smoother than usual. "We'll open with Jacob. Then I'll walk through the outcomes and—" "No," Lena interrupted. "Clear and cool. We'll start with Morgan." Silence. Trevor blinked, caught mid-thought, lips parting but nothing coming out. Lena didn't wait. "We'd like to begin with a recap from the person who actually managed the recovery effort." Jacob looked down at his notepad. He hadn't even opened the debrief doc I'd authored the night before, so I did what I always did. I showed up. I shared the real timeline, the one built from late nights, internal tickets, and triage calls. I walked them through how we'd stabilized their infrastructure, adjusted the scope for Phase 2, and rebuilt trust after the vendor breakdown. They didn't want to name out loud. I didn't embellish. I didn't name names. I let the work speak. Lena nodded through most of it, asking sharp, pointed questions only someone who'd done her homework would know to ask. When I finished, she leaned back, looked at Trevor, and said, "This is the person we trust. Going forward, we want Morgan on every strategic meeting and decision, non-negotiable." Trevor's smile cracked slightly. "Well, Morgan's schedule is already a bit full," he said carefully. "We've got internal shifts happening that may impact—" Lena cut him off, "then shift around her, or we'll reconsider our vendor relationship." The call ended 10 minutes later, and the fallout was immediate. Jacob was pulled from the project with no explanation. Internal murmurs began bubbling. Why was Novanta so adamant about Morgan? What happened to Jacob's role? By Thursday, the board had called an emergency session. By Friday, I got a message, not from Trevor, from someone in operations, asking for a copy of the archive I'd built for compliance purposes. I didn't respond. Instead, I encrypted the folder, attached it to a single zip file, and sent it to 2 places, one to the board's audit liaison, and one directly to Novanta. Subject line, clarification, for the record. No commentary, no summary, just the proof. By Monday, Trevor was transitioning out of the company. No email blast, no fond farewell, just a system notice that admin rights had been reassigned. He was gone, and I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clear. The lie had broken in public, not because I shouted, but because the truth finally had the floor. They hadn't just tried to cut me out. They'd underestimated the one thing they couldn't control, me. I didn't write a goodbye post, no dramatic message on Slack, no farewell email lined with fake gratitude. I just logged out for the last time, packed the few things I hadn't already sent home, and left my badge on the desk. By then, most people had figured it out. After Trevor's quiet removal and the Novanta fallout, everything shifted. HR scrambled to evaluate attribution standards. Internal comms rolled out new guidelines on contributor recognition. Someone even sent a survey asking how staff felt about visibility and fairness in project leadership. The irony, all that policy, all that reform, and not a single person said my name out loud. But the system had changed because I'd refused to disappear. A week later, I got the offer from Lena directly. "We've admired your calm, your clarity, and your technical integrity. We'd like you to join us full-time, double your salary, full autonomy, build the next phase with us, on your terms." I didn't hesitate, because this time, the work would carry my name, my voice, my signature. My first day at Novanta wasn't a headline moment, no big office reveal, no entourage. Just a glass-walled room, a blank whiteboard, and my own login credentials. I stood there alone for a while, let the quiet settle, Then I wrote one word at the top of the board: attribution. It wasn't revenge that got me here. It was documentation, clarity, the willingness to preserve the facts when no one else would. And now, the company that once let someone else take my credit. They'd built an internal policy because of me. They didn't even realize it, but they'd institutionalized my legacy. Stratus Edge would recover eventually. They'd hire more consultants, rename some processes, try to restore client trust. But the version of the company I'd bled for, it was gone, and maybe that's what made walking away easier, because I hadn't failed. I'd just outgrown the place that told me I was lucky to be included. Now, I was writing the rules. At Novanta, I built a new team, cross-functional, diverse, sharp as hell, and every project brief had contributor names in bold, no exceptions, because no one forgets how it feels to be erased. But when you've lived through that kind of silence, you never let it happen on your watch again. This wasn't just a new job. It was the right one. Not because they gave me a title, but because I gave myself something bigger: credit, control, and the power to make sure the next woman like me never has to archive her own worth, just to prove she was there.